Well, let's talk to Mark Littlewood. First up, Director of Popular Conservatism. Mark, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Great to be with you.
Yeah, good to see you. This is a big week, as I keep saying today, for Britain, and a big week for Europe, I suppose. Keir Starmer's going over to this summit, crisis summit, in Paris, which does feel rather to me like the sort of, the spoiled kids who are not happy about being rowed out of the big party, having a little party of their own. You know, the big conversation is going on in Saudi Arabia this morning between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov. And quite frankly, I think the British public, by and large, as I was saying, I don't know if you heard me talking to Gerald Howarth, have had enough of this, continual funding of a war that appears to be going nowhere.
Yes, I've got a lot of sympathy with the British public's view, especially as one of your viewers was just pointing out, we're making cuts that are directly hurting the British people.
Yeah.
Look, Mike, it's pretty unsurprising that, the European leaders are a bit of a sideshow here. We have decided not to properly fund defence, basically, each European country. The UK's been a little better than others, but not perfect. So why should the Americans listen to us? Effectively, NATO has become a welfare state for European security. We've just been living off dollar subsidies. So I think the Americans have got every right to say, well, we're the one paying for all of this security, or the large bulk of it. We're going to be the ones to negotiate it. And as for Keir Starmer saying that he's going to act as a bridge, well, I'm not saying it would be a bridge to nowhere, because what the White House gets up to is vital, but it would be a bridge from nowhere. I can't see anybody in this US administration saying that the solutions to the problems they face now is a bigger role for Keir Starmer. That seems to me utterly fanciful. But I would say this, okay, it does appear that the war has to some degree in Ukraine ground to a bit of a stalemate. But it is in our interest to ensure that if a peace deal can be struck, that it is stuck to. It would be a disaster if in 6 months, 12 months, 2 or 3 years' time, Putin decides he's going to have another go and breach whatever red line would be agreed in any putative peace deal. So we've got a bit of a stake in that. What I find completely curious is that Keir Starmer seems to already be talking about the precise number of troops that we might deploy. 25,000, I think, was mentioned. Well, you don't really know what deployment you might need, how many troops you might need, until you know the nature and the contours of any peace deal. And it's much more likely that it'll be equipment that will be useful rather than British boots on the ground, which potentially inflames.
Well, also, if he knew anything about history, Mark, he would look back at the Bosnian conflict and what happened in the Balkans, where I spent a fair bit of time. And the peacekeeping was done then by the UN. There were British troops there, but they were under the sort of blue-helmeted, guise of being there as representatives of the United Nations. Bizarrely enough, Ukrainian troops were also there, and they were sort of policing parts of Sarajevo. But the one thing the Ukrainian troops were most famous for was running prostitutes and drugs. So, that tells you a lot about what we're dealing with here. The bottom line for me is that why should Britain be supplying troops? We haven't got as many troops in this country as we've got illegal migrants. I mean, that's the situation. We are not a military power. We might as well stop pretending that we are, and Starmer should stop playing soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, you understate the position, Mike. I mean, the number of illegal migrants in Britain dwarfs the size of our military, which we've allowed to be hollowed out over a long period of time. Look, the truth is we've allowed the UK to position on the world stage, even on the European stage, to wither. Defence spending has been deprioritised. If actually called upon to defend ourselves rather than playing some role in the Russian-Ukraine conflict, it's difficult to imagine what we might be able to muster now. What sort of serious fighting force could we put together? I think it's highly, highly questionable. So we're going to have to spend some more on the military, and that's going to have to mean some cuts in other areas of government spending. I'm a great believer that the first and principal duty of government is to protect the realm, and that means defence spending should always be at the higher end of the list of spending priorities rather than completely disregarded. But we have to accept that having not done that, we're not really part and parcel of this process. And I just think it's extremely odd that Keir Starmer, I say, is throwing around these very specific numbers
Right.
before any peace deal's been reached. Any peace deal that is reached, it doesn't look like we're going to be much of a part of. At the very least, wait for that before you make any specific commitments.
Well, exactly right. I mean, Gerald Howarth described Donald Trump's administration as naive. I think they're very far from naive, but I think Starmer certainly is naive because in the midst of all of this wanting to support Ukraine stuff, he doesn't want to boost our military. He said it. He said he'll go up to 2.5%, but no higher. Well, you know, that's not going to make any sense, is it?
No, that is ludicrous, and I think we've got to realise now that if we want NATO to continue as a serious organisation, and as I was just saying, it is a serious organisation, but one that the American taxpayer has been colossally subsidising, then 2.5% of GDP is most likely the floor, not the ceiling of what we need to spend. We need to get to that number super quick to prove that we're serious. And I think you can trust that the Trump administration will be insisting that their NATO allies get to that number pretty fast. But it would not be ludicrous to imagine that future demands might be as high as 5% of GDP. Probably can't get there overnight, but the trajectory, I would have thought, needs to go far beyond 2.5%. And I rather agree with you, Mike, that this isn't, and disagree with Gerald Howarth. I don't think this is naivety from the Trump administration. Even if everybody's wishful thinking was that they would have liked Ukraine to prevail totally in the war and every Russian to be expelled from Ukrainian land and even Crimea to be taken back, doesn't look like that's realpolitik. The wishful thinking would be to hope that could happen. So it seems to me some sort of deal needs to be struck. And what will be front of mind for the Americans is how do you try and make sure that Putin sticks to that deal? And I'm not totally convinced that 25,000 British troops milling around in Ukraine is the best way of doing that. No. It might be, but to have put those numbers on the table right now seems to me cart well before horse.
Yes, no, absolutely right. Well, let's have a look at what Donald Trump thinks of Keir Starmer, because he was asked at the weekend what they might have to discuss when they meet up.
I just signed a letter to him. He asked for a meeting, and I agreed to the meeting. We're going to have a friendly meeting. Very good. We have a lot of good things going on. But he asked to come and see me, and I just accepted his asking.
Do you have a date for that, sir? What do you hope to
Very soon. I think he wants to come next week or the week after.
And what do you hope to discuss?
I don't know. It was his request, not mine. But, you know, I've met him twice already. We get along very well. He's a very nice guy.
He's got a brilliant way of sort of being dismissive about someone without apparently doing it offensively.
Absolutely classic Trump passive-aggressive behaviour there, right? He's sort of written me a letter. I think I've got a slot in my diary. God only knows what he wants to talk to me about, but, you know, I'll try and find a few minutes for him. Yeah, I mean, that underscores, I think, that although he ticks the right boxes of saying we've got a friendly relationship. Mind you, he says that about the leader of North Korea as well. But it underscores how fragile the special relationship really is now, Mike. I think the relationship between the British government and the US government is, somewhat frosty.
Yeah.
A lot frothier than we would like. So just, superb from Trump again. Yeah, I've signed this letter. God only knows what he wants to talk to me about, but, I'll try and squeeze him in between some of my more important meetings.
Yeah, exactly.
Very well delivered line.
Yes, absolutely right. Let's talk about the state of the cabinet. There's a lot of talk at the weekend about reshuffles. Rachel Reeves now, even by those who have been sort of saying, oh, she won't go anywhere because, in fact, that would look as though it was Starmer's appointment that went wrong. I mean, even John Rentoul in The Independent is now conceding that actually Reeves might not survive. She's under pressure now because I think it's a backbench Tory MP has written to Lloyds Bank asking for the report that was done on her expenses scandal, which she's continually trying to run away from. Lord HERMER's back in the news again. Turns out he's defended yet another Islamist terror suspect who's ended up being put in jail for life in America. He's likely not to make the reshuffle cut either. I mein, it's just going from bad to worse for this lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been, it's been a catastrophic start to this Labour government, only been in office for, what is it, 6 or 7 months
I think it's 8 now. Feels like a lot longer.
It feels like a whole bloody lifetime, actually.
It does.
And he's already lost a few cabinet ministers. Look, with regard to the Attorney General, I would have thought Starmer will realise he's got to shuffle him out.
Yeah.
It's just become too embarrassing. Look, if you are a lawyer, you tend to the fact that you take up various cases doesn't necessarily mean that you're sympathetic to the client on that case, but the list of cases fills in, doesn't it, one's sort of preconception of the Attorney General that he's not necessarily attuned with British interests. He seems to be attuned with interests of everybody apart from Britain's national interest, and that's pretty disastrous if you're the Attorney General. So I would have thought if Starmer's got any political nous, he'll have to shuffle out his friend there. Reeves, however, is a really difficult one for him. If you lose your Chancellor or choose to remove them, oftentimes it means the Prime Minister's on borrowed time.
Yes.
That is the key relationship. If he wants to get rid of the Attorney General, or I think Lisa Nandy's been another suggested potential casualty of a reshuffle, he can do that. But were he to drop Reeves, then I think he's got a real headache on his hands. But maybe if this keeps getting worse for Rachel Reeves, she falls on her own sword. I mean, there are now a string of questions that she seems completely incapable of answering.
Totally. I mean, if this accounts paper gets released, I don't know what the legalities are around something like that, confidentiality, etc. But you know, an MP of the country has asked for it. So if it is provided, and it does show that she was at the very least, you know, putting in dodgy expense claims, charging things to the company that she shouldn't have been charging. Also, I mean, the fact that we've discovered since last weekend that she was actually followed by somebody from the banking organisation to see what she was up to, because she kept spending so much time doing Labour Party jobs. Now, I don't know about you, I've had some interesting jobs in my time. I don't think I've ever been followed around by my employer to see what no good I'm getting up to. I don't think that's. I think if that's happening to you, you are in a pretty bad place.
Yeah, that's right. And look, maybe she's got an explanation for this, but her explanations to date about her past career activities have been somewhat wanting, haven't they, Mike? Yeah. I mean, the claim that she was working for the Bank of England for 10 years turns out to be 5.5. I'm to just, you know, accidentally apparently mislay 4.5 years of your professional life. That takes some doing, no explanation given. So Reeves is hoping that this will go away, but I always think when politicians get into a hole like this, they've got two possible strategies. One is to cross their fingers and then pray that the story moves on, that it becomes boring, you try and write it out. Usually the best story is that you put everything on the table immediately. You do some long sit-down interview. I'm sure you'd be happy to have her on your show, Mike, for an hour or so to go through this.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I can't even get Wes Streeting. I mean, I can't even get Wes Streeting on to boast about the 2 million extra appointments that have apparently been achieved by the NHS this year when they weren't on strike. Well, that's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I would have thought if I was advising Rachel Reeves, which would be an unlikely position for me to find myself in, but if I were to be, I think I would advise that her best chances of survival now are to put everything on the table, explain everything, admit whatever wrongdoings there were or mishaps or misunderstandings, but get it all out there. That's probably her best chance of survival, but I'd probably put her chances at measurably less than 50-50 over the medium term.
Very much so, very much so. Great to see you back, Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Thanks for talking to us this morning.
Thanks,
coming up,
well, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed that video, please make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the Popcorn YouTube channel. You can also find out more about us on our website, popularconservatism.com, and you can follow us on social media. Details are in the show notes below.